Hi, I'm Barbara. They said it was just a joke, that locking me in the basement while the house caught fire was some twisted lesson in resilience. It builds character, my mother said, as smoke curled under the door. I survived. But they rewrote the story, said I panicked, said I did it to myself. Then they cut me out of the will, tried to sell my house, even filed a lawsuit for emotional distress. Now, they're on the porch, knocking, asking to be let back in. But after everything, who do you let in when they once left you behind a locked door? I knew the smell before I even stepped through the door. Lemon pledge, old carpet, and forced cheer. My mom always believed a clean house made a clean conscience. I wasn't so sure anymore. The front room looked like a Hallmark card had vomited all over it. Balloons in lavender and gold. A cake shaped like a gift box. Isolde's 35th birthday banner strung across the fireplace like a crown. And everyone smiling too hard, too wide. I walked in, clutching the bottle of wine I'd brought out of politeness, not intention. "Barbara," Mom called from across the room, like she hadn't seen me in months, though she had texted 2 days ago, demanding I show up. "Look who made it! Isn't that wonderful?" "Sure is," I replied, my voice even, my jaw tighter than necessary. I could feel it already, the dance, the performative closeness, the unspoken reminders. Every fork was aligned like a soldier, every napkin folded with surgical precision. This wasn't a party, it was a presentation. Dorian came over, drink in hand, grinning. "Hey, sis, you look tired." I smiled without teeth. "Good to see you too." 15 minutes in, the lights dimmed and someone wheeled in a screen. Oh no, not the slideshow. "Time for memory lane," Mom announced, clapping too eagerly. I made for the edge of the room, but froze halfway through my second sip of sparkling water. There it was. Slide 3. A painting. Watercolor. Blue and violet storm clouds over a field of gold. I knew every stroke, every single brush line. I had painted it when I was 12. It had hung in my room for a year before it mysteriously vanished. On screen, the caption read, "Dorian's first art award, age 12. My stomach turned. Mom leaned in, her voice bright. "Wasn't it cute when Dorian was our little Picasso?" I stared at the screen, at my painting, at the lie beaming in pixels. I remembered crying when it disappeared. They said maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I was being dramatic. I remembered believing them. I took a breath. "It's beautiful," I said. Nobody noticed the shake in my voice. I whispered inside my head, I wonder if Picasso ever got punched in the gut by his own last name. I left the room and made my way to the kitchen, needing a minute. It was empty, thank God. I opened a cabinet to grab napkins, knocked over a small tin in the process. It clattered, the lid popped open. Inside was a bunch of old name tags from family reunions. I picked one up. "Barbara, the liability." My hand went cold. The ink had faded, but not enough to disguise Mom's handwriting. My chest ached. I could still hear her voice, years ago. "Don't wear pink, Barbara. It makes you look unstable." I stared at the label. That was never a joke. That was a verdict. I slipped the tag back, slower than I wanted to. When I returned to the party, my plate stayed empty. I walked through the crowd like a ghost with lipstick on. Dorian was retelling some exaggerated story about a camping trip where he rescued a raccoon. Isolde laughed like it was the best story she'd ever heard. My mom pulled me aside. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "try to look less tense. It's Isolde's day." I turned to her, voice quiet but edged. "You labeled me a liability when I was 12. You think I've been tense since last week?" She blinked, smiled like nothing had been said, and walked away. That's when I knew. I wasn't here for family. I was here to remember why I didn't come around anymore. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, washed my face twice. I didn't cry. I'd used up all those tears a decade ago. From my purse, I pulled out a sealed envelope labeled, "In case I'm gaslit again." Inside was a printed email from the county property office. Ownership of the family home, my name only. I slipped the envelope back into my bag. I hadn't come to fight, but if they started it, this time I was staying until the end. My mom's voice pierced through the bathroom door. "Barbara, could you come sign something real quick?" I opened the bathroom door and was greeted by the smell of buttercream frosting and the murmured clinks of glasses. The house wasn't loud, too much tension for noise, but there was an unnatural calm, like a gathering of people waiting for a verdict they already knew. I stepped into the dining room. Everyone was seated now, their faces turned toward me like I'd interrupted something sacred. Verena stood at the head of the table, beaming, the kind of smile that made my stomach twist. "Sweetheart," she said, her tone dipped in artificial honey, "we want to make today memorable. Just one thing to wrap up." On the table beside the birthday cake, pink, glossy, two-tiered, and too much, was a manila folder. Its presence was casual, as if it belonged between the salad tongs and the gift bags. "Before we cut the cake," she continued, "we thought this would be symbolic." Dorian swirled a drink in his glass, not even looking up. Isolde clapped, overly eager. I hadn't seen her this animated since high school cheer tryouts. Verena opened the folder and slid the contents toward me. "It's just paperwork to make the house official. Co-ownership. You know, a legacy gesture." I stared at the top line. "Transfer of property from Barbara E., last name, to Isolde V., last name." My fingers hovered over the page. "You want me to give Isolde the house?" Verena laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be so literal. Just share it. It's her 30th. Think of it as a gesture of love." I flipped through the rest. There was no clause, no repayment terms, no temporary agreement, just a straight transfer. Tucked behind it was a non-disclosure agreement and an addendum that read, "Barbara acknowledges past mental health concerns and agrees not to pursue liability against immediate family members." I looked up slowly. "Is this a joke?" Dorian chuckled under his breath. "Here we go." Verena stepped closer. "Barbara, healing only works if we stop holding on to the past." My hands were shaking, not from confusion, from clarity. Before I could speak, Dorian stood, grabbed a slice of cake, and smirked. "Maybe she's still mad about the fire." Isolde laughed too loud, then covered her mouth. Verena gave Dorian a sharp glance, but said nothing. I stepped back. "You locked me in a basement. I was 14. Dorian shrugged. "It was a dare. I thought you left." "You didn't even look for me," I said. He rolled his eyes and, before I could move, shoved the cake straight into my face. Gasps exploded around the room. Someone's phone clicked. Someone else laughed. I stood there, frosting dripping down my chin, and in that second, the room blurred. Smoke. The door slamming. The heat building under the doorframe, my voice screaming until it cracked. I blinked and I was back. No fire, just humiliation. Verena sighed. "Barbara, this is exactly the behavior we're trying to move past. This attitude is why you're alone." She turned toward the cake with a knife. I wiped my face with a cloth napkin. "You want me to sign over my house, but you never once gave me a room where I was safe." I grabbed my purse, turned, and walked to the door. Behind me, Isolde whispered, "Mom said she'd convince her." Verena's voice called out, saccharine and smug. "Barbara, don't walk away again. Be the bigger person." I turned just enough to look over my shoulder. I was always the bigger person. You just never looked down far enough to see me. The door slammed behind me. And suddenly, it felt like smoke again. But this time, I was running toward air. The street was quiet. I was halfway to my car when I saw someone standing by the mailbox, holding a piece of paper. She was holding a flyer, some neighborhood event printout half crumpled in her hand. I nodded politely, said nothing, and got in the car. My fingers trembled as I shut the door. The air inside was stale and heavy, the kind that clings to skin and memory. I didn't turn the engine on. I just sat there, palms resting on the steering wheel, trying to remember how to breathe like a person who hadn't just had birthday cake weaponized against her. My phone buzzed. One new message. From Isolde. You always overreact. That's why Mom had to tell people you needed help. There it was. The script. The family's favorite monologue, rehearsed, repeated, and refined over the years until it sounded like truth. But the line between overreaction and reaction is paper thin when the fire never stopped. I stared out the windshield at the hydrangeas lining the curb. They were always her favorite. Pink because blue made her look tired. That's what Mom used to say. But in that moment, all I saw was a wall. Soft-looking, but thick and rooted. Just like the silence they'd cultivated. Without thinking, my hand reached for the glove compartment. Inside was a weathered envelope with my name scribbled in my own handwriting, years old, creased from moves and neglect. I opened it like I had done too many times before. Inside, a copy of the official fire department report. Date-stamped, signed, and painfully specific. Victim was discovered unconscious in the basement. Entry required force through rear window. Door was locked from the outside. I exhaled so slowly, it almost hurt. The report always made my hands stop shaking. It didn't comfort me, it confirmed me. There's a difference. The memory didn't wait for permission. It came like smoke, fast, invasive, everywhere at once. It was summer, 14. The air conditioner had broken that day, and the house felt like it was exhaling heat with every breath. Dorian had dared me, his smirk as smug as it was careless. Bet you can't stay down there overnight. You're too soft, he said. And then the lock clicked. At first, I laughed. I thought it was a joke, a stupid prank. But then minutes passed. Then hours. Then the smell started. Plastic. Acrid and unnatural. I clawed at the door, my fingers raw. I screamed until my throat was sandpaper. I pounded until my knuckles bled. And then, nothing. The next memory was blue. Blue fluorescent lights above a hospital bed. The antiseptic sting of saline. The quiet beep of monitors tracking a life that almost slipped away without anyone noticing. Verena sat beside me, calm as church. They said you panicked and locked yourself in, she whispered, brushing hair from my forehead. It's okay. These things happen. You're just sensitive. The doctor nodded. Didn't question it. A week later, the school counselor smiled gently and said, Your mother mentioned you have a vivid imagination. Let's work on staying grounded. And just like that, the rewrite began. Sitting in my car, I opened my phone and scrolled through Facebook posts from that year. Mom's update, dated weeks after the fire, read, Barbara has always been such a creative spirit. Trauma is complex. Grateful she's doing better. Dorian's post was worse. We forgive even when people lock themselves in basements and scare us all to death. Family's what matters. I didn't know whether to laugh or vomit. Maybe both. I whispered to myself, they didn't tell one lie. They built a whole library. The fire didn't erase me. It just gave them a clean page to write a version of me that fit better in their story. I looked at the report again, then back at the texts, the posts, the carefully curated fiction. My hand hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. I wasn't going to erase the evidence like they had tried to erase me. Instead, I sent the fire report to a private email with the subject line, If they ever try again. That's when the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, picked it up. Ms. Barbara? A woman's voice said. This is Arliss, from down the street. We need to talk. I should have said something years ago. Arliss's voice cracked with guilt, but I kept mine steady. We talked for 20 minutes, her words painting the kind of truth I didn't know I needed. She'd seen the smoke from her kitchen. She called the fire department. She waited on the curb, yelling my name, while my family remained inside. Eating, talking, pretending. That night, I barely slept. I sat up rereading the fire report until the numbers blurred into ghosts. Around 2 a.m., a text came in from an unknown contact. No name attached. Just 5 words. I booked you with Dr. Klein. It was her. Verena had always had a thing for control dressed up as concern. The appointment was for 10:30 that morning. I should have canceled, but curiosity can be a reckless thing, especially when you've been gaslit by professionals before. I figured, if anything, I'd catch them in the act. The waiting room smelled like lavender and old carpet. It made my skin itch. I gave the receptionist my name and sat down across from a fish tank with no fish, just plastic plants swaying in a tiny artificial current. Dr. Klein's office was over-decorated. Books he didn't read. Degrees in frames. A sculpture that looked like something from a dentist's lobby. He smiled too fast, shook my hand too long. "Barbara, it's good you came." He didn't ask what brought me in. He opened a file already on his desk. My name was on the tab. "You're clearly articulate," he said within the first 5 minutes. "Your mother always said you were too smart for your own peace." I blinked. "She talks to you?" He nodded, unfazed. "Families have patterns. I like to understand the full landscape." I swallowed. "You mean she gave you a narrative?" He shrugged, as if this was all standard protocol. "Only background to protect you." And there it was. I had walked into a trap disguised as a therapy session. I stared at the wall behind him, where a painting of a river tried to convince me peace was possible in this room. I stood up. "I don't need a couch to be professionally gaslit. I've had years of practice for free." He didn't stop me. I didn't slam the door. That's the thing about people who think they're in control. They never see you leave until you're already gone. I stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Isolde. She was seated on one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, fiddling with her phone. Her hair was tied back, makeup undone. She looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping, or maybe just someone who'd finally started seeing clearly. She glanced up, startled. "You too?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "They used him on me when I left Aaron." I froze. She never talked about that breakup, just that it had ended and Mom said it was for the best. "He was—" She paused, dropped her voice. "He wasn't safe." My breath caught. "And they didn't believe you." She shook her head, said I was being dramatic, that I had abandonment issues because of Dad leaving early. I studied her face. It wasn't makeup or tiredness. It was recognition and regret. "Back then, I thought you were just extra," she said, "but now I see they script everything." I gave a half smile. "Takes guts to say that. Just don't let it stop there." I didn't wait for her reply. I walked out into the Sacramento sun, my breath coming easier than it had in days. Back in my car, I let the engine hum beneath me. I was halfway through composing an email to my attorney when my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Unknown number. I played it, speaker on. "Ms. Barbara, I'm calling from Sacramento Property Records. There's been a recent request to alter the deed to your home." I played it again, slower this time. Someone was trying to erase me, on paper. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, replaying the voicemail until the words imprinted in my bones. Alter the deed. The nerve. I hadn't even made it 24 hours from their last ambush before they tried to finish what they started, this time with paperwork. That night, after pacing the length of my apartment for what felt like hours, I collapsed onto the couch, laptop in my lap. I needed to understand just how far they were willing to go. That's when I opened the family group chat. My mother had just sent a message. "Look what I found! The photo from the day we almost lost Barbara." I clicked the link. The image loaded slowly, like it knew it was about to hurt me. It showed Verena, Dorian, and Isolde standing outside the house, our old home. Their arms were stretched toward the camera, faces twisted in theatrical panic. Behind them, smoke billowed in a neat swirl above the roof. The caption read, "We screamed until she was pulled out. That day changed us all." Changed you? You never even showed up. My chest tightened. That day, I had been unconscious. I hadn't seen anyone's face. I only remembered waking up under fluorescent lights and being told the firemen were Lucky to get me out in time. I zoomed in on the photo. Their clothes, their expressions. Something felt off. The colors were too crisp. The shadows didn't match the smoke. I ran the image through a reverse search. Less than a minute later, I found it. Originally posted 2 years after the fire. A church picnic. Same outfits, same backdrop. But no smoke, no urgency, no screaming. They didn't just edit the truth. They manufactured a lie from a Sunday lunch. I whispered to myself, they didn't just rewrite history, they staged it. By the time the clock hit midnight, I knew what I had to do. I pulled on jeans, grabbed my keys, and drove to my storage unit just off Folsom Boulevard. The place smelled like dust and regret. I hadn't opened most of these boxes in years, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. Grandpa's old DVR? He used to say it was for keeping an eye on the garden. I knew better. That camera had been aimed at the basement door for a reason. The unit's back corner held a box labeled "Tools Don't Toss." Inside, beneath a nest of coaxial cables and expired batteries, was the black camera body, heavier than I remembered. I took it home, charged it overnight, and prayed the files hadn't corrupted. By dawn, the screen flickered to life. The interface was clunky, but the date filter worked. June 3rd, 14 years ago. The footage was grainy, grayscale, time-stamped. I skipped past hours of silence until a motion sensor alert blinked on the screen. There he was. Dorian, teenaged, grinning. He walked into frame, looked around, then pulled the basement door shut with both hands. The timestamp blinked. Then he reached out and turned the lock. I pressed pause. My heart stopped just for a beat. I kept watching. 10 minutes later, the camera caught shadows flickering under the door. Smoke began to curl upward. The lower half of the frame danced with rising heat. No one came. Then, my hands, banging from the inside. My fists slamming against the wood. Still, no one came. I watched that version of me disappear behind the camera's final frame, and something inside me settled. Not like peace, like proof. I saved the clip in 3 formats, uploaded one to a secure drive, emailed another to myself under the subject line, in case they deny me again. They say the camera doesn't lie. I wish I'd believed that sooner. Before they convinced me, I imagined everything. Later that morning, I reopened the doctored photo. My finger hovered over the download icon. Just one last save before I deleted it from the chat, just to remind myself what I was up against. A notification flashed at the top of the screen. Verena just shared this photo in a public post. Tagged, Dorian, Isolde, and Barbara. I clicked View Post. First comment, so brave. You all should be proud of how you protected her. I stared at it, then closed the laptop. I wasn't protected, I said to the quiet room. I was packaged. The image of that fake photo still burned behind my eyes as I drove. I didn't remember starting the engine or pulling out of the apartment complex. I just knew I had to go. Back to the house, not as their daughter, but as the legal owner with something to say. It was early afternoon by the time I pulled up to 184 Riverside Lane. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had finally grown into the woman who no longer needed to shrink herself to fit inside it. I stepped out of the car, the manila envelope tucked under my arm, and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, Verena opened the door. Her expression flickered from surprise to irritation and under a breath. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice flat. I didn't bother answering her question. "We need to talk." Dorian appeared in the hallway behind her, arms folded like a bouncer. Isolde peeked from the stairs but didn't say a word. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said calmly, "but you all seem to have forgotten something. The house is in my name, and while I'm not kicking anyone out today, I will be heard." Verena crossed her arms. "No more theatrics, Barbara. You need to leave." My jaw clenched. The envelope crinkled in my grip. "I'll make it easy," I replied. "Show me to my room. I'll grab what's left of my things and go." They didn't stop me. The hallway was the same, still lined with those fake floral prints Verena insisted looked timeless. I opened the door to my old bedroom. It smelled like old carpet and other people's decisions. Half the space had been converted into storage. But there, in the far corner, was the suitcase. Still packed, still dusty, just as I had left it the night I was forced out at 19. I pulled it out, the wheels squeaking like they hadn't moved in years. I walked it down the hallway toward the front door. As I passed the living room window, I noticed our neighbor, Mrs. Langley, watering her plants. Verena stepped outside and called out to her, smiling sweetly. "Barbara's going through another one of her dramatic spells." I stopped in the driveway, turned just enough to be heard. "I'm not dramatic," I said clearly. "I'm detailed. There's a difference." The suitcase hit the trunk with a thud. I didn't look back. I drove straight to Tina's house on the other side of town. She met me on the porch, arms crossed but soft-eyed. "I've got space in the garage," she said. "It's hot, but it's yours." I didn't need more than that. The space was barely wide enough to fit a car and a work table. Boxes of tax forms and tools lined the walls. But it was mine for now. I set up a makeshift desk using an old folding table, my laptop, and a desk lamp held together with duct tape. Over the next few days, I did what I had always done when life broke a bone. I started building something stronger around the scar. I sent out proposals, reached out to an old contact who now worked at a small California-based startup. 3 days later, I landed a UX contract. I rented a P.O. box so they couldn't trace my address, filed a business name with the state, and for the first time in years, I was starting something entirely mine. One evening, Tina walked in while I was hunched over wireframes, the overhead bulb swaying in rhythm with the fan. "You ever take a breath?" she asked, arms folded. I grinned faintly. "Rest is for people who aren't one lie away from being erased." She sat on a paint can, exhaling slowly. "You're not running away, you know. You're building your own hallway." I nodded. That line stuck with me longer than it should have. Later that night, after Tina went to bed, I opened my email. Subject: Potential buyers list, 184 Riverside Lane. I froze. I opened the attachment. Verena was trying to sell the house, my house, without so much as a conversation. The listed broker? Same agent she used when she transferred Grandpa's cabin to Dorian years ago under the guise of simplifying estate logistics. Some people fake memories, some fake ownership, but I never thought they'd try to sell my name. The next morning, I didn't brew coffee. I didn't check the weather. I drove straight to the Sacramento County Recorder's office before my pulse had a chance to slow down. My inbox still held the listing email, and I'd printed the PDF at a FedEx store at 7 on the dot. A name was circled in red, same broker Verena used when she quietly handed Dorian Grandpa's lake cabin. History was not just repeating, it was being Xeroxed. Inside the county building, the clerk behind the glass partition tapped her keyboard like she was trying to break it. "Address?" she asked. 184 Riverside Lane, I said. My voice was steady, but my jaw was tense. She nodded, clicked again, and squinted at her screen. "Looks like a recent motion's been filed to amend historical ownership. Says you relinquished claim voluntarily, due to mental health concerns." I blinked. "What?" She turned the monitor slightly. "It's notarized, effective last Friday." I stepped back, heat crawling up my neck. That's a forged signature. I never signed anything, and I sure as hell didn't relinquish anything. She handed me a printout. I read the language aloud, voice shaking only slightly. "This confirms the removal of Barbara, last name, from all rights, claim, or access to the property at 184 Riverside Lane." Same phrasing they used the night they packed up my stuff in a single suitcase and told me, "You're not welcome here." They hadn't disinherited me today. They just finally put it on paper. I took the document, folded it carefully, and walked out without saying another word. I didn't go back to Tina's garage. I didn't go to the co-working cafe where I usually built wireframes and answered client emails. I drove to a quiet spot near 19th and L, parked in front of the Red Maple Cafe, and waited. At 11:15, Arliss walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was age, or maybe it was the weight of silence finally sitting too long in her bones. "Thanks for coming," I said, pulling out a chair. She sat slowly, setting a manila folder on the table. "I was your neighbor, the day of the fire. I saw everything." Her hands trembled around a cup of black coffee. "I heard the banging. I heard you screaming. I was the one who called 911. Not your mother, not your brother. No one was outside when the trucks came. They were still in the house when the firefighters broke in." She pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a copy of her statement, an incident report she had filed back then and never followed up on. I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you say anything?" She hesitated. "Your mom told people you weren't well, said you made things up, that you had episodes." I nodded, not surprised. "I didn't speak up because I thought, maybe she was protecting you. Maybe I misunderstood." I looked her dead in the eye. "I've heard worse from people who looked me in the eye and said they loved me." Tears welled in her eyes. "It was wrong. I should have done more." I closed the folder gently. "You did enough. You remembered." We sat in silence for a minute, long enough for me to realize how much this meant, and how little it changed what had already been done. As I left the cafe, I opened the folder again. Tucked behind the report was something I hadn't seen. A call log, time-stamped from the morning of the fire. First caller ID, Arliss's landline. Not Verena, not Dorian, not anyone from the family. My phone buzzed just as I reached my car. Email, from Dorian. Subject, "Let's be civil, you're embarrassing yourself." I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen. Then I whispered, "You haven't seen embarrassment, but you're about to." By the time I hit reply on Dorian's email, I already had the fire report, Arliss's signed statement, and the call log ready to go. But I didn't send them. Not yet. I didn't need words. I needed action, and I knew exactly where to start. That Thursday morning, I walked into the real estate office downtown wearing jeans, a black t-shirt, and the kind of stillness that made receptionists nervous. My attorney, Randall, met me in the lobby with a manila folder already in hand. "Everything's prepared," he said quietly. "We close in 15 minutes." The office smelled like fresh paint and overcharged toner, a place built for erasing the past, with just enough polish to look official. The seller's agent never showed. It didn't matter. Randall slid the documents across the table. I signed every page with a calm that didn't match the firestorm I felt inside. When it was done, the receptionist handed me the keys. "Funny," she said, half laughing. "The seller never asked who was buying." I tucked the keys into my purse and smiled. "That's why I paid cash." Afterward, I stopped by a locksmith on Franklin, asked for the quietest deadbolt they had. Then I filed the eviction notice. Lease termination. Effective 30 days from delivery. Legal, clean, final. I didn't even bother driving straight home. I parked 4 houses down from Riverside Lane and waited. I watched from the shadow of my rearview mirror as Verena opened the front door around 8 p.m. She wore her hair up, wine glass in one hand, phone in the other. She stepped outside to grab a package, probably some overpriced candle she'd use once and gift later, when her eyes landed on the notice taped to the doorframe. Even from the car, I saw her freeze, read, then read again. The glass dropped. Dorian appeared behind her, barefoot, shirtless, with a box labeled "for storage" in his arms. He shouted, loud enough for the whole street to hear, "She can't do this!" Inside the car, I whispered, "I already did." I didn't linger. I didn't need to. Their screams were loud enough to echo long after I drove off. Back at Tina's garage, the air felt warmer than usual. I sat on the edge of the cot, holding the new keys like a rosary. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I placed them in a drawer, turned the lock, and walked away. I didn't win, That word never fit right anyway. What I did was reclaim, inch by inch, breath by breath. No music, no celebration, just quiet. The kind that doesn't need an audience to be true. The next morning, I checked my P.O. box before heading to a coffee shop downtown. One small package, no return address. Inside, a flash drive. That was it. No note, no context. But the label? Truth, finally! I went home, made tea, and sat at my laptop. I plugged in the drive. The first file blinked to life. FireNightVoicemail.ov. I clicked on the file, and for a moment, there was nothing but static. Like the drive needed a second to remember how to breathe. Then her voice came through, clear, direct, chilling. Don't let anyone in that room until I say. She needs to know what it's like. It was Verena, sharp, calculated, talking to someone, maybe Dorian, maybe someone else. I didn't recognize the other voice, but it didn't matter. That line, she needs to know what it's like. I sat there, letting the words settle into the spaces my memories had tried to seal off. There were other files. A scanned letter from Uncle Ephraim, confessing that Verena had threatened to cut him out of the family completely if he spoke up about the fire. And a photo, time-stamped. There I was, limp, soot-covered, being carried out by a firefighter. And behind me? No one. No Dorian. No Verena. No one. There was the match. And now the flame. The next morning, I got dressed in silence and drove straight to the courthouse. I didn't wear anything special, just a gray blazer and black slacks. I didn't need to look strong. I just needed to look like someone who had nothing left to prove. The clerk at the front desk glanced up. Back again? I nodded. Filing a motion, evidence for an injunction. They're trying to sell a house that belongs to me. She recognized my name. She didn't ask for details. You know, she said softly, they've already filed a countersuit. Emotional distress, defamation. I almost laughed. They better have tissues in court. By noon, I had turned in the full packet. Fire report, Arliss's sworn statement, call logs, photos, and now, the voicemail. Randall, my attorney, said we'd get an emergency hearing by Friday. That gave them just enough time to think they still had a shot. Friday came fast. The courtroom was cold, with that stale institutional air that seemed to cling to unresolved truth. I sat at the front, flanked by Randall and a paralegal. Verena walked in wearing navy, her expression pinched and polished. Dorian followed, chewing gum like it was a defense strategy. The judge entered. We stood. We sat. And then the surprise. Your Honor, Randall said, we'd like to call a witness, someone not listed in the original filing. The judge narrowed her eyes. You understand the risk? We do. The bailiff opened the side door. Chief Armando Mendez stepped through. Former fire captain, retired 10 years now. Still upright, still focused. He took the stand, placed a thick hand on the Bible, and sat. I pulled the girl out myself, he said. Back then, it wasn't my place to speak, but that doesn't mean I forgot. Verena objected. Her lawyer said the testimony was irrelevant. The judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. Mendez leaned forward. We got the call from a neighbor. No one from that house called us. No one was outside yelling. We broke the basement window. We dragged her out while the family sat in the living room. The room was silent. Verena looked straight ahead. Dorian bounced his leg under the table. Isolde! She was in the back, hands clasped in her lap, eyes red. The judge looked over the files, nodded slowly, then said, If what has been presented here is true, there may be grounds for criminal charges. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. I stood and left the courtroom without looking at Verena. I didn't need to see her face. I already knew what lived behind it. Outside, the sun was blinding. A half-dozen reporters swarmed the sidewalk, questions flying, microphones thrust forward. I walked straight through them. No words, no answers. At the corner, my phone buzzed. A message from Thurman, my father. You win, it read. But there's something in the will you don't know. I stared at the screen. I didn't need to win. I needed the world to stop believing their version. But what he said next made me realize the story still had one secret left to tell. I didn't call him back right away. I waited until Saturday morning, then met Thurman at a modest legal office tucked behind a row of fast food chains and dry cleaners. The kind of place no one noticed unless they had paperwork or regrets. He looked older. Not old, just worn. The way people do when they've spent decades keeping their spine straight while someone else steered. We sat across from each other at the conference table. He didn't try to hug me. That was something. "You were left off the original trust," he said, sliding a file across to me. "Your mother told the attorneys you'd voluntarily surrendered your share during your recovery." That word. He avoided my eyes. "She forged your signature, said it was to avoid complications." I didn't speak, just let the silence bloom like a bruise between us. "And Dorian," he paused, voice catching. "He drained almost everything. Gambling, bad crypto investments. He even took out loans in my name. I didn't know until the collection started." I opened the file, saw my name omitted in perfect legal font. "He didn't fall," I said finally. "You all padded the ground until the padding caught fire." Thurman didn't respond. Maybe because he knew there was nothing left to say. That same afternoon, local news ran a short segment about a subpoena issued for Dorian. Wire fraud, estate misuse. I watched it from the corner of a sandwich shop, my phone propped against a salt shaker. He looked tired in the footage. Not sorry, just tired. His social post later read, "People betray you when you give too much. I regret trusting everyone." I almost laughed. "Funny," I muttered to myself. "I regret not seeing through you sooner." 2 days later, I returned to the family house. My house. I parked in the back, unlocked the gate, and stepped into the yard. The grass was overgrown, but not wild. Just forgotten. I walked toward the deck. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffle, and then, from under the wooden steps, emerged a shape I hadn't seen in years. Milo, the family cat, old and stiff-legged, with a torn ear and eyes still too wide for his face. He limped toward me slowly, cautiously. Then, without hesitation, nudged his head into my palm. "You remember me, huh?" I whispered, kneeling down. He purred softly, circling once before settling beside my feet. No one had told him what to think. No one rewrote me in his mind. He just remembered. And that, more than court filings or witness statements, broke me in a way that finally felt clean. I sat on the deck for a while with Milo, watching the sun shift across the fence. A breeze came through. For once, it didn't feel like warning. It felt like permission. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Emails. From people I never expected. My fourth-grade teacher, a neighbor who once told me to keep my music down, even an old friend from church. "I'm sorry. I should have asked what happened." "We didn't know. We just believed her." I didn't write back, but I printed every message, taped them up along the back wall of my new home office, just above the window where the light came in softest. Not forgiveness, just evidence of awakening. Then came the voicemail. Unfamiliar number. No introduction, just her voice. "Verena. You may have the house," she said. "You may even win. But I will never say I was wrong. Never." I closed my eyes and whispered, "You just did." The day of the will reading came with heavy skies. Thick, gray, undecided whether to break open or hold their grief a little longer. I walked into the legal office alone, but not empty. I carried silence like armor now. Isolde sat near the corner of the room. She didn't look up, didn't wave, just clutched a tissue in her lap like it was the last apology she had left. Verena entered 5 minutes late, sunglasses on despite the dim light. Her lips were pursed so tight they looked stapled shut. Dorian didn't show. The lawyer, a calm man with thin glasses and an overused yellow legal pad, cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. This is the updated reading of the family name trust and property allocation, as amended 2 weeks ago. He looked at me first. To Barbara, we reinstate her full property and estate share, based on new evidence presented. He didn't need to elaborate. Everyone in the room already knew what that meant. To Dorian, the trust is suspended pending investigation. Verena opened her mouth, but he cut her off. There is more. He unfolded a single page, read slowly, deliberately. It's a letter from Ephraim, last name, submitted posthumously. In his words, I witnessed the family deliberately exclude Barbara from the trust. Verena told me, and I quote, she needs to be taught she's not indispensable. That's the only way she'll shut up. The room didn't gasp. The silence did. Isolde turned away, wiping her face. Verena said nothing. I said one word. Quietly. Finally. Afterward, I found Thurman outside near the parking lot, standing alone in a patch of early afternoon sun. He held a worn manila folder in both hands, like it might float away if he let go. I owe you this, he said, handing it to me. Inside were property records, signed deeds, notarized forms. These are the papers, the ones I signed to sell your grandparents' lake cabin, to cover Dorian's rehab and restitution. I flipped through the documents. My name was on the title. You didn't ask, I said, not a question. He lowered his head. Your mother said you wouldn't care, that you wouldn't know. You didn't even look at me and ask. He didn't defend himself, just nodded like someone who finally understood what accountability tastes like when there's no salt to sugarcoat it. We walked in silence toward the bus depot a few blocks away. He was leaving town, staying with a cousin up north. No one had asked him to. No one had stopped him. We sat on the wooden bench as a bus pulled in. He watched the doors open, then looked at me. I didn't know how to father you, he said. You scared me. You still do. It wasn't cruel. It was the closest he'd ever come to the truth. I nodded. That's the closest thing to truth I've ever heard from you. He boarded without turning back. I didn't wave. Later that evening, I walked home. The rain had started, soft, insistent, like it had been holding back for years and finally got permission. As I reached the porch, I noticed something wedged into the doorframe. A single sheet of notebook paper. No envelope. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, rushed. I'm sorry, I should have stood up earlier. Isolde. I folded it once, slid it into my coat pocket. Then I noticed the manila envelope beneath it. Official, sealed. A court subpoena, filed by Verena, claiming emotional damages. I didn't sigh. I didn't curse. I just stood there, letting the rain soak through my sleeves, thinking one thought as clear as glass. They weren't finished. But neither was I. A month passed like a door swinging shut. Slow at first, then final. The lawsuit didn't disappear, but it stalled. My attorney filed the right papers. The subpoena never reached trial. Maybe Verena realized how little sympathy there was left for her. Or maybe she finally accepted that the audience she once played to had turned their chairs. The morning of the center's opening arrived cool and still. I stood outside the renovated house, my house, though I no longer called it that, and read the plaque bolted near the front steps. Layla's Light, Center for Recovery and Rebirth. They asked if I would live in it, I told a reporter earlier that week. But some places aren't meant to be homes again. They're meant to be starting lines. The front yard was filled with folding chairs, a podium, and people I didn't expect. Local officials, teachers, volunteers, women from shelters, mothers, daughters. Tina wore a navy blazer and stood behind the reception desk, clipboard in hand. Milo slept on the window ledge, tail flicking in slow circles. I adjusted the mic and took a deep breath. As I stepped toward the ribbon, the breeze lifted my sleeve just enough. A child in the front row pointed at my wrist and whispered to her mom. Someone asked gently, "What does that mean?" They were referring to the 3 small black dots tattooed on the inside of my wrist. I smiled. 3 days, I said. Basement, silence, survival. I never forgot. Now I make sure others don't have to. Applause rose, not loud, not showy, but real. I didn't feel proud. I felt present. Across the street, a car door shut. I turned subtly. Verena stood near the sidewalk, her posture tight, eyes shaded beneath sunglasses she no longer needed. Dorian hovered a few steps behind her, thinner, worn. They didn't cross over. They just stood and watched. A young reporter approached with a notepad. Verena shook her head and stepped back. Dorian said something low, maybe to her, maybe to himself. She made this about her. And from the edge of the crowd, Isolde stepped beside him and answered, without looking at either of them. No, she made it about healing. We just weren't invited. Inside the center, the ceremony gave way to quiet conversations, laughter over coffee, hands tracing old photos of other survivors, now mentors. I wandered the halls slowly. The paint was fresh, but the walls still remembered. I touched the doorknob of the basement. It was unlocked. I opened it. The stairs were carpeted. Lights gently glowed down the railings. At the bottom, cushions, art supplies, a low bookcase full of journals. I stood in the doorway and whispered, I was never weak. I was waiting. Then I locked the door, not to keep anyone in, but because the day was done. Later that night, I turned off the lights room by room, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. When I reached the front door, I paused and looked back at the quiet hallway. I didn't reclaim the house, I said softly to the dark. I reclaimed the silence, and I filled it with my name. Hi, I'm Keziah. They told me to stand by the door and smile, said it was just to help. My sister laughed at me, at her own promotion party. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I had been their story all along. Their proof of goodness. The deaf sister, the loyal shadow. They used my silence to build her spotlight. I gave everything, and they took my name off the one thing I created. So I finally asked myself, what happens when the gatekeeper stops opening the door? I didn't even know there was a dress code until I walked through the front archway and felt eyes scanning me from every direction. The Lakewood Grand Hall wasn't what I expected. Gold-trimmed chandeliers, velvet-lined walls, and that smell of too much perfume trying to cover up too much money. I wore a simple navy coat, the one I always wear when I want to disappear. I thought I'd slip in quietly, maybe stand in the back, clap at the right moments, then go home. But Mom had other plans. Kez! She called before I even made it past the entryway. Her voice had that edge, fake sweet with just enough steel under it to cut through me. Come with me, sweetheart. I followed her to a side hallway near the coat room. That's when she handed it to me, folded in a neat square, like it was something to be proud of. A black polo shirt with the words, Deaf Support Security Volunteer, stitched in white thread on the chest, and below it, a lanyard with a laminated tag. My name wasn't even on it. They're short on staff, she said, avoiding my eyes. Brindis pulled every string to make this night perfect. You'll be helping people get checked in. Smooth things out at the door, that's all. I just stood there, holding that shirt. It felt heavier than it looked. It's not a big deal, she added, patting my shoulder, like I was some child confused at a fire drill. Don't make this about yourself. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and changed in the restroom. The shirt was snug, not made for someone shaped like me. It scratched at my neck. The name tag swung awkwardly when I walked, slapping against my chest like punctuation. I tried to tuck my hair behind my ears, but even that made me feel exposed. The main entrance was wide open by then. Guests began arriving, heels clicking on tile, laughter echoing in waves. No one looked at me twice. Most didn't look at all. I handed out brochures, checked off names, waved to people who didn't wave back. One little girl, maybe 6 or 7, stopped and pointed at my badge. Is she really deaf? She asked her father. He didn't answer, just tugged her along like I was part of the furniture. For the next hour, I smiled like I was supposed to. I nodded when people said things I couldn't fully hear. My hearing loss isn't total, but in rooms like this, with clinking glasses and 100 voices bouncing off the walls, it might as well be. I've gotten good at faking it, reading lips, filling in blanks, pretending I caught the joke just in time to laugh. The problem is, they think that means I'm fine. And they love that. They love the image of me being resilient, strong. They call it inspiring. But they don't invite me to the table. They invite me to the door. When Brindis arrived, she didn't even glance my way. She floated in like she owned the damn building, wrapped in some designer green dress with her curls pinned perfectly, flanked by executives and photographers. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, from my post, next to the fire extinguisher and a rack of umbrellas. She passed within 3 feet of me. I half raised a hand, but stopped myself. She didn't look over. Of course she didn't. My chest felt tight, but not like sadness. More like a quiet knot. Not pain, just compression. I kept doing my job. I kept doing what they asked. And somewhere in the quiet between welcome and enjoy your evening, a memory knocked loose. Snow, years ago. We were maybe 10 and 13, bundled up in winter coats in our old backyard. I'd built a snow fort, lopsided, sure, but it stood. Brindis came stomping through with her sled and smashed the side. "Why'd you do that?" I'd asked, voice muffled under my scarf. She pulled off her mittens. "If you can't talk right, don't ruin the game for everyone." I hadn't thought about that in years. The night stretched. My fingers went numb from holding the brochures. My smile went rigid. Later, I overheard one of Brindis's co-workers saying, "Her sister's helping at the door? That's sweet." Sweet. As if it were charity. As if I were a prop. There were name cards on the tables. Gold calligraphy, centered. I didn't have one. I checked twice, quietly, just to be sure. There wasn't even a chair marked for me. I was supposed to stay by the door, like a ghost ushering the living. The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the tribute video. Laughter faded into hushed reverence, and I stood there, frozen in that shirt, nameless badge pressing against my skin. I didn't know it yet, but tonight wasn't just about her promotion. It was about my erasure. The video started playing just as I stepped further into the ballroom. One of the servers must have taken pity on me because he quietly nodded me past the guest list line with a discreet gesture. I didn't thank him out loud. Just a slight nod and a forced smile. That was all I had left. I hugged the back wall. It smelled like lavender polish and overcooked salmon. Around me, people settled into their chairs, leaning toward one another, whispering and chuckling in that careful cocktail party way, just enough to feel superior, not rude. Then her voice cut through the room. "Brindis." Standing at the mic with that fake polished laugh she used around upper management, she launched into some story about early career challenges and how support from home helped her become the leader she is today. People clapped. I didn't. My hands were still, gripping the hem of my shirt to keep them from shaking. Then she turned toward me. "This is my sister, Keziah," she said, flashing a smile like I was a novelty she'd dusted off just for tonight. "She's always supported me, in her own quiet way." I felt every head swivel in my direction. She wasn't done. "She can't hear well," she added with a light chuckle. "So just smile and wave." Laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel. Worse. It was soft, polite, like I was an oddity people weren't sure how to handle. I didn't wave, I didn't move. I didn't know humiliation could feel this still. From across the room, a man in a gray suit leaned toward Brindis. I could see his mouth move. I couldn't hear his words exactly, but I caught enough. "Wait, is she family? I thought she was staff." She didn't even hesitate. "Kind of both," she said. "She likes to feel useful. Let's not confuse her." Let's not confuse her. As if my mind was the problem, not her ego. I watched her turn back to her audience, continue her speech, bask in the glow of curated admiration like nothing had happened. That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, not violently. Just enough. I remembered a year ago. She'd asked me to help review a clause in a contract she didn't understand. Something about international licensing and non-compete terms. I spent 2 nights researching, checking legal references, making sure she didn't sign something she'd regret. She never mentioned it again. Tonight, I was the help. I slipped out of the ballroom as the applause rose again. My footsteps were quiet against the carpeted hallway, but the echo in my chest was thunder. I found a narrow hallway beside the restrooms, cooler, dimmer. From the shadows, I watched her through the open door. She was still glowing, laughing at the right beats, hands gesturing like she'd trained in a mirror. It used to be easier to let her shine when I believed she still saw me. But now I knew better. There's a difference between being humble and being invisible, and I was tired of disappearing so she could feel big. I reached into my purse, fumbling past a pack of tissues and an old lip balm until my fingers brushed against the flash drive. It was small, almost weightless, but I could feel what it meant. On that drive was the full draft of the East Asia pitch she delivered 2 months ago, the one that secured her promotion. She'd sent me her bullet points at 11:17 p.m. on a Thursday. "Can you help make this sound smarter?" she'd texted. I stayed up until 3 a.m., pulling together market data, tailoring language, tightening slides. She said, "Thanks." The next morning, that was it. Tonight, she'd said it was all hers. I closed my fist around the flash drive and leaned back against the wall. I didn't want to destroy her. I just didn't want to keep hiding behind her. That's when I heard a light tap near my elbow. I turned. It was Aveline, one of the younger women from the comms team. I recognized her from the HR orientation I'd briefly helped Brindis review months ago. She handed me a glass of water. No words. Just a soft smile. I nodded. That was the first time that night I felt like someone saw me, not as a project or a lesson in patience, but just a person. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Thanks for the water. You're the only one who's treated me like I'm here." I didn't send it, but I saved it in drafts. Maybe I'd send it later. Maybe. I stayed in that hallway a while longer, listening to the muffled rhythm of celebration echoing from the ballroom. Every cheer, every toast, it all blurred into one long drone, like a movie I'd seen too many times and finally understood the ending. They called me a gatekeeper, maybe I am. But tonight I decide who gets to walk through what door. I stayed in that hallway longer than I meant to, long enough for the room to shift back into noise, toasts, and clinking glasses. My fingers still pressed around the flash drive in my coat pocket, its plastic edges digging slightly into my palm. Something about that small sting kept me grounded. Eventually, I slipped back into the corridor toward the restroom. Not because I needed to use it, but because I needed air that wasn't soaked in perfume and champagne. The hallway leading to the ladies' room was quiet, tucked between the service exit and the private coat room. I stepped inside the bathroom, letting the soft click of the door closing behind me dull everything else. The lighting was softer here, frosted bulbs above the sinks, a pale beige tile that made the space feel like a doctor's office. Empty. I took the stall at the end, sat down, not on the toilet, but just sat, arms folded across my chest, head against the divider. That's when I heard them come in. The door swung open with the rhythm of 2 familiar voices mid-conversation. I recognized them instantly. Brindis. Marlene. They didn't know I was in there. "I just hope she doesn't do something stupid," Brindis muttered. "God, I'm already getting enough sympathy comments tonight. I don't need people reminding me she's standing out there like some unpaid mascot." "You're overthinking it," Mom said. "She should feel lucky you let her be here at all. I told you. Without you, she'd still be sorting paper at that temp agency." My breath caught, but not in shock. It was more like confirmation, the kind that doesn't stab but sinks. "She's got no real direction," Mom continued. "You've got a name now, a real title. People respect you. Don't let her mess that up." And then came the line that gutted me clean. "You've carried her your whole life, Brindis. They should be thanking you for it. I closed my eyes, leaned harder into the metal stall wall. I could hear my own pulse. My mouth went dry. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect, yelling, fists clenched. I was just emptying out. Because it wasn't a misunderstanding. They meant it. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. I waited. After they flushed and left, laughing over some man's bad tie in the ballroom, I stayed seated another minute before standing. I didn't look at myself in the mirror right away. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app and hit save. Not for drama, not for revenge. Just, in case the truth ever needed to speak louder than they did. I finally looked up and saw my reflection under that soft, forgiving bathroom light. I looked like someone I used to know, someone who let things slide, who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But I mouthed something at the mirror I hadn't dared say out loud. Not ever. This is the last time you walk into a room small. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a promise. It was a line drawn in breath and resolve. On my way out of the bathroom, I passed by the gift table. There was a display in the center, a handmade shadow box, a collage of old family recipes, pressed flowers, and a letter from Grandma Edith framed inside. A little gold plaque at the bottom read, "Gift from Brindis, in loving memory." I stopped. Because I made that. I made that 2 months ago, on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I stayed up late mounting it, choosing each detail. I gave it to Brindis to deliver. She told me she'd present it on behalf of us both. Instead, she slapped her name on it. That's when something inside me rearranged. I thought about the job offer I turned down years ago, the one at the nonprofit in Duluth, because Grandma had just come home from the hospital and someone needed to be there. Brindis said she couldn't pause her career. So I did. I said, yes, I'll stay. Later, she told her company she delayed grad school for family obligations. She told them she cared for a disabled sister and an ailing grandmother, all while building her future. She told that story in her TEDx speech, her story. It was mine. I stepped away from the gift table slowly, careful not to knock anything over. My hands were steady now. Strangely so. I didn't cry. I didn't boil over. I just saw it for what it was. Plain, bold, and written across every inch of this event. They never wanted me to speak. They wanted me to exist as their proof. Proof they were good, giving, noble, but never equal. Back in the hallway, I texted myself a note. They lied louder than I was ever allowed to tell the truth. And as I walked past the ballroom again, that same flash drive pulsed against my side. It wasn't time yet, but it would be soon. They thought I couldn't hear, but I've heard enough to never forget. As I made my way back toward the main ballroom, I passed a large standing mirror near the coat check. For a moment, I caught my own reflection. Still in that black volunteer polo, still wearing that plastic name tag like it belonged to someone else. I looked like I'd been hired for crowd control, not born into this family. The hallway forked just before the photo booth area, where people had started lining up for professional snapshots. Laughter floated down the hall, people fixing their collars, asking for filters, adjusting dresses that were never meant to be comfortable, only expensive. That's when I saw her, my mother. She wasn't looking for me. She was scanning the space like a hostess checking table settings before a wedding. When she finally spotted me, her mouth pulled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "There you are," she said, as if I'd wandered off like a child in a grocery store. "Come, sweetheart, the family photo's about to start." I followed her, slowly. Just before we reached the backdrop, she turned and pulled something from her purse, a folded ivory shawl. She placed it in my hands without asking. "You should wear this," she said, tapping my badge lightly with a manicured finger. "Covers the tag, and it'll look more polished." I looked down at it, then at her. "I thought I wasn't supposed to draw attention," I said, voice low. She chuckled, soft and clipped. "Let's not make this about you tonight, okay? Your sisters worked hard for this." Before I could answer, She was already walking away, calling out to the photographer. My mouth stayed shut. My fingers tightened around the shawl, but I didn't put it on. "Okay, folks, big smiles," the photographer said, raising his voice above the chatter. "Let's start with immediate family." People shuffled into place, shoulders angled, faces arranged like magazine covers. Brindis took her spot front and center, as expected. She tossed her hair once, caught the light just right. Executives and partners faded to the edge of the frame. Then, Mom turned back toward me. "Kez, honey, would you mind taking this one for us?" It wasn't a question. I felt something in my chest drop, not snap, not crack, just quietly fall. No one objected, no one even turned. So I nodded, stepped forward, and took the camera. My hands weren't shaking, not this time. I looked through the viewfinder, adjusted the focus, and pressed the shutter. The flash burst. Too bright. And for a split second, everything was white. When my vision returned, I checked the screen. The image was perfect, perfect in the way staged things always are. Except it was missing someone. I lowered the camera and handed it back to the assistant without a word. No one thanked me. They were already laughing at something Brindis had said. I stepped back from the group and moved toward the far side of the room, just outside the spotlight, beside a column where I could still see without being seen. That's when Aveline appeared. She didn't ask to sit. She just stood beside me for a moment, watching the crowd. Then, casually, she glanced my way. "You okay?" I gave her a single nod. She looked back at the group, then said quietly, "You're not just the one holding the camera, you know." And before I could respond, she was gone again, swallowed by the party. I looked back at the crowd. No one had noticed I was gone. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe that was the point. I leaned against the column and crossed my arms, letting the hum of conversation and clinking glasses fade into background noise. They hadn't needed Photoshop to erase me from that photo. They'd just done what they always did, ignored me. And I had let them. Until now. The lights in the ballroom dimmed again, this time for a toast I wasn't invited to hear. I stayed back, leaning against the same column, not out of exhaustion, but choice. From where I stood, I could see the catering staff moving trays of chocolate truffles to the dessert table. The music shifted into something upbeat and inoffensive, like everything else about this night. I was about to step toward the exit when Aveline reappeared. She moved casually, as if she were stretching her legs or avoiding a conversation she didn't want to have. We locked eyes for a second before she came to stand beside me again, hands folded. "You know that pitch Brindis won the award for?" she said, her voice light, as if talking about weather. I nodded, though I wasn't sure where she was going with it. Aveline pulled out her phone and tapped something, then turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of a shared company folder. My last name was clearly visible in the file title, Row Asia Strategy, V2, PPTX. "There's a version floating around the internal drive. Someone forwarded it to me by mistake," she said. "Apparently, it's been scrubbed since, but I keep backups." The air left my lungs in a quiet, measured exhale. I didn't need to ask. I knew what it was. I wrote that pitch. The data, the structure, the framing, every section of that slide deck had passed through my hands. Brindis had sent me the bullet points, with no formatting, and a line that read, "Can you clean this up? It's due Monday morning. I'd worked through the weekend while Grandma coughed herself to sleep in the other room." Now it had her name on it. "She said she created it from scratch," Aveline added softly. "But I've seen your formatting before." I met Aveline's gaze. She didn't flinch. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Because I think you're the only person here who doesn't pretend anymore." Before I could answer, someone called her name from across the room and she walked away. Just like that. I didn't follow. I stayed rooted in that same spot, arms still crossed, head lowered just slightly, like a boxer waiting for the next round. but the bell didn't ring. Instead, I drifted down a quieter hallway near the green room where speakers prepped before taking the stage. Brindis had just wrapped up her panel, and I caught sight of her pulling off a lapel mic and handing it to a technician. Her voice was still buoyant, but her eyes darted around as if checking for someone she hoped wouldn't be there. She turned and found me standing 10 feet away. "Oh," she said, quickly recovering. "Kez, didn't expect you back here." I stepped forward calmly, but with purpose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. "I saw the original file in the company server," I said, tone even. "It has my name on it. The pitch? The one you were praised for." Her mouth opened slightly, then pressed into a thin, performative smile. "Listen," she started, stepping closer. "We both know how these things work. The team only needs one point of contact. I was just trying to keep it streamlined." "You told them you wrote it alone." Brindis gave a short laugh that didn't match the situation. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. Honestly, I thought we were past the whole credit thing. You always said you didn't care about recognition." I paused, then replied, "I said that when I thought you cared about the truth." She blinked. "You should be careful calling something yours," I added, "especially when it's traceable." The smile faded. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said plainly. "I'm warning you." We stood in silence. She didn't speak again, just stared. I walked away first. Back in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Aveline. She must have seen us talking. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Aveline, I think they see you now." That might scare them. I stared at the message, not because I doubted her, but because it felt like something shifted. Something irreversible. It wasn't rage that filled me. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something quieter, more exact. They'd spent so long pretending I didn't matter, that I wasn't sharp enough to notice or bold enough to act. But tonight, I let them see just enough. It wasn't a threat. It was a preview. I didn't go back to the ballroom right away. I took the longer route down the corridor behind the catering station, the kind of back hallway only staff usually used. It smelled faintly of dishwasher soap and burnt coffee. Safe. Neutral. I needed that neutrality. Around the corner near the storage area, there was a side table where someone had stashed a stack of event programs, half-empty soda cans, and a silver bowl of wrapped mints. I set my purse down next to them and reached inside. The manila folder was still there, creased at the edges now, from hours of being carried around like some kind of amulet. I'd brought it mostly out of habit, just in case. I hadn't planned to use it, but now, that just in case felt like a certainty. I pulled it open and skimmed through its contents, even though I already knew every page by heart. The original email thread, the unedited draft of the East Asia pitch, the PowerPoint with the creation timestamps. Everything that proved the truth, not just about that one presentation, but about a pattern. A pattern of taking, renaming, and polishing my work until it looked like hers. I could have dropped it off at the front desk anonymously. I could have handed it to HR on Monday, but none of those options felt right anymore. I slid the folder back into my bag and walked toward the family display table, the one set up near the ballroom entrance with floral arrangements and framed photos. At the center was a shadow box, a delicate glass frame with our grandmother's handwriting, clipped recipes, even one of her old handkerchiefs stitched into the background. A gold card in front read, "Gift from Brindis, in loving memory." I stopped cold. I made that. Every part of it, gluing the backing, ironing the handkerchief, scanning the recipes one by one, even the handwritten note I tucked behind the frame. She taught us how to taste before we spoke. Weeks ago, Brindis had come by the apartment, said she wanted to drop off extra vitamins for Grandma's old arthritis kit that she still hadn't thrown away. She saw the frame sitting on my coffee table, half wrapped in tissue. "This is beautiful," she'd said, turning it in her hands. I told her it wasn't finished. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. Now it had her name on it. I didn't feel a wave of shock, no boiling heat under my skin, just a dry, certain kind of disappointment. Like looking at your own handwriting and realizing someone forged your signature perfectly. I saw Mom near the entrance, chatting with someone from the board. I walked up to her without rushing, without ceremony. She turned mid-sentence and smiled. "Don't frown, Kez," she said. "It's a celebration." "That gift?" I said calmly, nodding toward the display. She followed my gaze, confused for a second, then gave a light shrug. "It's lovely, isn't it?" "It wasn't hers," I said. "You know that." She blinked, then sighed, like I was causing trouble again. "Kezia, it's all in the family." I held her stare. "Not anymore. I don't loan meaning." That's all I said. Then I turned away, walking past the buffet line, the laugh tracks, the dim lighting meant to hide sharp edges. Near the catering station, I spotted a familiar face, Benji, one of the assistant managers. We'd gone to the same high school back in the day. He probably didn't remember, but he was the kind of person who paid attention when most people didn't. I handed him the folder and said, "You'll want this before the final speech." He looked at me curiously, but didn't ask. Just nodded. And that was it. No announcement, no fireworks, just done. I walked out through the service door, into the loading dock where staff took breaks between shifts. It was quiet out there, cold but honest. I leaned against the railing and looked up at the sky. Blank, gray, endless. Let her call it loyalty. I'll call it the last time. Back inside, the temperature had shifted. Not the actual air, but the energy. There was a pause in the evening, that low murmur of voices settling into silence, the lull just before a big moment. I didn't go back to the seat I was never given. I remained near the edge of the room, close to the AV station, where the technician hovered over a laptop, prepping the final segment. The tribute. The lights dimmed gradually. Conversations faded into hushes. Glasses clinked a final time. And then the screen lit up. It began with soft music and images of Brindis as a child, smiling in playgrounds, standing in front of trophies, hugging our grandmother. Each slide moved into another chapter of her career, each voiceover layering praise like frosting. She's a visionary, a mentor, someone who leads with heart. Then came the part where they usually acknowledge support systems, family, siblings, mentors. Except there was no sibling. My name never came up. Not in captions, not in photos, not even in the scripted narration that some PR person probably wrote. There were shots of our family, but I wasn't in them. Cropped, omitted, or simply never invited when they were taken. I didn't even realize my hand had moved to my purse until I felt the cool metal of the USB. By the time the video faded to black, the applause began rising, and I walked. Not fast, not hesitant either, just steady, controlled. I stepped onto the stage from the side, not where speakers usually entered. There was a brief flicker of confusion in the audience, the kind of moment where everyone pretends they're not watching until they realize they can't look away. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't make eye contact with Brindis. I walked straight to the laptop, placed the USB beside it, and turned toward the tech guy, Benji. He looked at me. I nodded once. Nothing dramatic. Behind me, Aveline stood near the edge of the crowd. She'd been waiting, not asked, not instructed. Just ready. She stepped forward, tapped a few keys, and clicked play. The screen changed. The music stopped. No voiceover this time. Just slides. My original slides. The ones I had stayed up until 3 a.m. refining. Timestamps. Metadata. Author listed as Keziah Rowe, not Brindis Langford. A short pause. Then an overlay. Brindis's final version, used in her keynote speech 2 months ago. Identical structure, same visuals. Copy-pasted lines, including one sentence I'd typed in a daze while half asleep at the kitchen table. All I needed was a chance. That sentence had been her closing quote. Now the audience saw where it came from. The room didn't erupt. There were no gasps, no dramatics. But it froze. The CEO, Brindis's direct superior, turned slightly in his chair, looking at her, then back to the screen. Marlene's face, just a few rows in, went pale. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, lips tight, and the applause that had started to swell died. The video ended. The screen went dark. I didn't bow, I didn't smile. I turned and walked off the stage. There was no music to cue my exit, no MC rushing to smooth things over. I made it halfway to the side door when I heard it, soft but unmistakable. A single pair of hands clapping. I glanced back. A junior designer, maybe 23, was the only one standing. He looked nervous but determined. Then he stopped. No one joined him. He sat back down. But it was enough. I kept walking until I reached the far end of the hallway again. I leaned against the cool plaster and let out a long, controlled breath. She wanted applause, I thought, but I brought silence louder than anything she's ever heard. I hadn't reached the parking lot yet when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, uneven, heels against concrete. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could already picture my mother's coat flaring as she caught up, and the way Brindis would follow 2 steps behind, like she always did when Mom was ready to do the talking. "Wait!" Marlene called out, her voice cutting through the cold air. "We need to speak, right now." I stopped just short of the lot, near the edge where the curb sloped into a snow-dusted sidewalk. The sky above the venue had gone a deeper gray, nearly black at the edges, and the only sound was the wind catching the edge of the rental tent behind us. "You humiliated your sister in front of her entire company," she said, breathless, eyes narrowed. "Do you even realize what you've done to this family?" I turned slowly. "Which family is that?" I asked. "The one that doesn't even let me in the picture?" Brindis stood a few feet back, her expression unreadable. The way she held her clutch in both hands told me she wasn't there to argue. She was just hoping Mom could clean it up like always. "I should have known better," Marlene hissed, her voice tight with that special kind of disappointment she reserved just for me. "Your sister has built a name, a reputation, and you drop a grenade in the middle of it because what? You weren't in a slideshow?" I held her stare. "You keep calling her reputation earned, but all she did was borrow everything that made mine invisible." Brindis stepped forward, finally finding her voice. "You could have said something to me, privately." "You don't do private," I replied, calm as still water. "You do public praise and private theft." Her mouth opened, but I kept going. "You've told people for years that you supported me, that you made space for me, but you didn't support me. You positioned me, just close enough to serve your image, just far enough to never threaten it." Brindis blinked, her expression faltering. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "it's not. And you've benefited from that imbalance for a very long time." There was no yelling, no door slamming, just the hard, measured silence of someone who's already walked through fire and has no interest in going back inside the building. I turned to leave again. "You're overreacting," Marlene called after me. "You've always been too sensitive. This is why we didn't include you more. Everything becomes about you." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. On my way across the lot, I saw him, leaning against a car that looked too new for him, Dorian. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. High school classmates, almost somethings. We'd lost touch when my world closed in after graduation. He tilted his head as I passed, then straightened. "Kezia?" I paused. "Yeah." His brows lifted, recognition settling in slowly. "I didn't recognize you. Sorry, it's been years." I nodded, offering a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "That's okay," I said. "I'm still learning to recognize myself too." We stood there a second longer, both knowing this wasn't a beginning or an end, just a footnote. Then I kept walking. My car was cold, and the seatbelt buckle shocked my hand when I reached for it. I turned the ignition, letting the heater groan to life, and stared out at the windshield as it started to fog. No one followed me. No one knocked on the window, begged for a redo, or even asked if I was okay. And that silence was perfect. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over a blank message, then opened my drafts. Still there. The message I never sent to Aveline. Thank you for treating me like I was actually here. I hit send. Within seconds, 3 dots appeared. Her reply came quickly. Anytime. I stared at that single word, exhaled, and let my grip on the steering wheel loosen. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't victory. It was something better. This time, I left the party, but I didn't leave myself behind. The next morning came quietly. No dramatic sunlight through the windows, no sudden feeling of triumph. Just the gentle clink of my spoon against a chipped mug as I stirred instant coffee in my apartment. The kind of silence that's earned, not imposed. My phone buzzed once on the counter. The message preview read, FYI, check internal memo board, Aveline. I opened the company portal. There, buried between budget updates and holiday party thank yous, was a quiet correction issued by HR. Acknowledgement of an oversight in authorship regarding the Q3 international presentation. No names, no accusations. But it was enough. No scandal, no headlines, just the truth. Tucked into a corner, quietly present. That was how change starts. Not with noise, but with something that refuses to stay buried. I sipped my coffee and walked over to the fridge. A photo was magneted to the top left corner, one from a family vacation to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was probably 13 in that picture. Everyone else was smiling on the dock. I was in the background, out of focus, half in the frame, half not. I used to keep it there as a reminder of where I came from, of what it meant to be included in the Langford household. Now it didn't sting. It just felt over. I didn't need to be in the picture anymore. Not theirs, anyway. Later that afternoon, I opened my inbox again. Buried beneath spam from online newsletters I forgot to unsubscribe from was a message with a subject line that read, "We'd still love to have you, Keziah." It was from a nonprofit I'd once interviewed with, years ago, back when I declined the role because Grandma had just started needing full-time help. They remembered my application, said they'd come across my writing recently, probably through one of the internal circles that Aveline's quiet memo had trickled into. They were opening the role again, and I was at the top of their list. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop without replying. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I wanted to sit with the feeling for a minute of being wanted for what I actually did, not who I supported. By early evening, I went for a walk. No real destination, just downtown, where the city was already dressed in string lights and cold wind. The sky hung low, heavy with unfallen snow, like it was waiting for permission. I passed a local gallery on 10th and Emerson. Its windows were steamy, the kind of fog that clung to glass from breath and bodies. Inside, people wandered among minimalist displays, light installations, abstract canvases. But one frame in the front window stopped me cold. It was empty. Beneath it, a small card read, "The one who was always there." I stood still for a full minute. Then I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Not for Instagram, not to send to anyone, just for me. Back home, I stood in the kitchen with my coat still on and typed a message to Aveline. "I'm not coming to Sunday dinners, but if you ever want a real one, let's plan something that matters." She replied within seconds. "Deal, you bring dessert." The microwave beeped behind me, the sound grounding. I hadn't cooked. I just reheated leftover soup from 2 nights ago. Still, it tasted different. Not better, just mine. Later, I opened my journal. It had been untouched for months, maybe longer. I wrote one line across the page, slowly. This isn't revenge. This is reclamation. And beneath it, almost without thinking, I don't need their frame. I've built my own. Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most are the ones who silence us first. Not always with cruelty, sometimes just with convenience, or comfort, or shame. But silence, even when quiet, can still be loud enough to erase you. I used to believe that if I stayed small, stayed useful, stayed out of the way, I'd eventually be invited in. But here's what I've learned. Being quiet to keep the peace isn't peace at all. It's postponement. And eventually, your truth will want to be heard, whether you whisper it or walk it to the front of a stage. To anyone watching who has ever felt invisible in your own family, like your value was measured only in what you could give, not who you are, I see you. And more importantly, I hope you start seeing yourself too. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever stepped out of a role that was assigned to you, but never truly fit you? Have you ever kept the peace so long, you forgot what your voice even sounded like? Let me know in the comments below. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I read everything, and I want to hear your voice. And hey, if you didn't like this story, I respect that too. Tell me why. Tell me what part didn't sit right. Let's make this a space where honesty is welcome. If this video meant something to you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We have more real, human, and deeply personal journeys coming, and I'd love to have you walk with us. Thank you for listening. Hello, my name's Elira. And last week, at our family reunion, my sister stood up in front of everyone and said, "You're not welcome anymore. You're not family." But that wasn't the beginning. That was just the first time they said it out loud. They'd already cut me out of photos, replaced my name on legal papers, passed around group chats calling me the ATM girl. They didn't just forget me, they rewrote me. And now I'm asking myself, was I ever really part of this family? Or just a role they needed filled? I arrived a little early, maybe 15 minutes before the official start. The yard smelled like cut grass and citronella candles. A row of white folding chairs curved around long tables draped in linen. Name cards fluttered in the breeze, pinned under clear plates and silverware polished just enough for a picture. I scanned the lineup of names. Marvin's card was front and center, of course. Aunt Judy had hers right beside Marvine's, and even the cousin who hadn't shown up in 4 years had a spot. But there was no Elira. Not at the head table, not even by the cooler, not anywhere. I stood there for a few seconds, pretending to reread each name. My hands were dry, but I kept wiping them against the sides of my dress like I'd touched something sticky. Maybe they forgot. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. "Must have been a printing error," Marvine said as she passed behind me. Her voice was dipped in sweet tea, but had that sharp edge only she knew how to deliver with a smile. "You'll manage, right?" I nodded once, then walked past everyone and sat down at the furthest end of the yard, where an extra chair leaned unevenly near the trash bin and a stack of spare napkins. Nobody said anything, not a single, "Hey, glad you made it." Just half smiles and raised chins from across the lawn. The food was good. Marvine always went all out for optics. Glazed ham, sweet potatoes with toasted marshmallows, deviled eggs with paprika lined like trophies. I ate just enough to keep my hands busy. The conversations buzzed around me. Wedding plans, new jobs, a baby on the way. No one asked about my life, and I stopped expecting them 2 years ago. After the plates were cleared, I saw it coming, the shift in energy. Marvane clinked her glass with a butter knife, the sound crisp and practiced. Conversations died down. Everyone turned their chairs toward the makeshift platform she stood on, microphone in hand. I didn't expect a toast, but I didn't expect what came next either. "We've talked," she said, holding her wine like she was about to bless the room. "And we've agreed. Elira is no longer part of this family." It landed like a slap, but no one flinched. A few chuckled nervously. Uncle Trey adjusted his collar. My mother looked at the tablecloth. And someone, I don't even know who, actually clapped. I stayed seated, my hands in my lap, my wine glass untouched. I waited for someone to interrupt her. To say it was a joke, but it wasn't. And the worst part? It felt rehearsed, scripted. Like this was the scene they'd been preparing for, and I'd walked right into it. Marvine continued, still smiling. This family is about unity, about mutual respect. And some people, some choices, just don't fit that anymore. It's time we stop pretending otherwise. No one looked at me. Not really. Not even Mom. Especially not Mom. I thought about saying something, anything, but the words turned to stone in my throat. Instead, I listened to the clink of forks being placed gently on plates, to the wine being poured like nothing had happened. After a while, the applause died down. Conversation resumed, shallow and strained. Someone asked about the price of mulch, another about school schedules. And just like that, my exile was absorbed into the hum of family normalcy. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the legs scrape the wooden deck. No one turned around. Walking away from the table, I passed the photographer lining up the cousins for a group shot. He asked, "You want in?" out of habit. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm just passing through." The camera clicked anyway, capturing a memory I wouldn't be in. As I rounded the corner of the house, I felt the sweat pooling under my collar. Not from heat, but from stillness, like I'd been holding my breath for a decade and just realized it. I kept walking, through the side yard, past the carport, until the laughter faded behind me. I reached the gate that led out to the driveway and paused. Last year, I made a scrapbook, hand-cut pages, captions written in silver ink, laminated photos from every branch of our family tree. I mailed it 2 weeks early. At the time, I told myself it was a gesture of goodwill. Looking back, I realize it was more like a peace offering wrapped in silence. No one ever brought it up. No one displayed it. It just disappeared. Like me. I stood by the gate longer than I should have. The porch lights flickered on behind me. I heard someone shout for more ice. And someone else laughed, loud, throaty. Maybe it was Aunt Judy. Maybe it wasn't. Did it matter? Not anymore. I turned away from the gate slowly, not because I was unsure of leaving, but because I wasn't sure I'd ever come back. The sun was dipping lower, throwing long shadows across the backyard. I walked back toward the event, blending into the edges where no one would notice me. Not that anyone had before. I wasn't ready to go yet. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me walk out like I didn't belong. If I was going to leave, it would be on my terms. For now, I sat in the back row, out of frame, but still in the room. They'd set up a projector under the old sycamore tree. Someone dimmed the lights, and a digital slideshow flickered onto the hanging white sheet. The title screen said, "Family Through the Years." Soft music hummed from the Bluetooth speakers. Piano, sentimental, predictable. The first few photos were black and white. My parents on their wedding day, Uncle Rick in Vietnam, baby pictures of Marvine dressed in frilly bonnets. Then came the 90s. Theme parks, beach trips, Thanksgiving dinners, faces I remembered, moments I hadn't thought of in years. But none of them included me. Not one. Even in group shots where I remembered standing, I'd been edited out, or the photo was cropped so tightly I didn't exist in the frame. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I'd look up and see my 12th birthday, or the Christmas where I saved the dinner after the oven went out. But nothing came. It was as if I'd never been born. I leaned toward Branwen, who sat 2 seats away, fiddling with the condensation on her glass. "Did you help pick these?" I asked quietly. She looked over, startled. No. Marvine and your mom handled everything. They said it was easier that way." Easier to erase me, apparently. I didn't cry. I just sat back in the metal chair, the legs sinking into the grass, and watched people laugh and comment on the slides like they were watching a documentary about a world I never lived in. "You remember that trip to Gatlinburg?" someone said. "Alira was with us, right?" Marvine didn't even turn her head. "No, she stayed home that year. Too busy with college, I think." That was a lie. I'd been the one who booked the cabin, who drove everyone up when Dad's car broke down. I still remembered carrying Marvine's suitcase because she said her back hurt. But sure, rewrite the script. The screen moved on to wedding photos, including ones from Marvin's big day. Her husband, Deshaun, had his arm around her, grinning like he'd won the lottery. My stomach knotted, but I kept my expression neutral. I hadn't seen Deshaun since the day he vanished from my life. No goodbye, no closure. We had dated for 4 years. We talked about marriage, kids, getting a dog. Then one morning, he ghosted me. 2 months later, I heard from a mutual friend that he and Marvin were a thing. A year later, they were married. Mom said nothing. No one did. Now, here he was, crossing the lawn toward me with a glass of iced tea in hand, wearing a beige linen shirt like he was straight out of a vacation brochure. "I didn't think you'd show," he said casually. I looked up. "Neither did I." He chuckled, awkward. "You look good." I nodded. "I know." He stood there a moment too long, like he thought this was going to be a moment. I didn't give him one. "How's married life?" I asked, voice even. "It's, busy. We've got the little one now. Keeps us on our toes." I raised an eyebrow. "Glad to hear you're finally capable of commitment." He blinked, then smiled too wide. "Always had that fire, huh?" "No," I said, finishing my drink. I just finally stopped confusing silence with kindness. Before he could respond, I walked past him toward the drink table, where Branwen was pretending to pour more lemonade into a half-full cup. "That was something," she muttered. I glanced sideways. "You knew?" Her eyes dropped. "I didn't know it started with you, but once I saw them together, I didn't ask questions." "Must have been easier that way," I said, my voice clipped. A few minutes later, while the slideshow still flickered behind us, Branwen leaned in again. "You know that scrapbook you sent last year?" I turned to her slowly. "Mom tossed it," she said, voice low. "Said it was too self-centered. Too many photos of you." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I'd spent hours putting that together, cropping, gluing, captioning. I'd even included people I hadn't spoken to in years. Not because I craved attention, but because I thought maybe if they saw the memories laid out in front of them, they'd remember how much I'd loved them. Turns out, love isn't always enough to make someone look your way. I stood there for a long while, surrounded by a crowd that had decided I was disposable. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was something colder than that, something quieter. I wasn't sad they forgot me. I was done reminding them I existed. I stayed until the last frame of the slideshow faded into black, not because I wanted to, but because walking out would have made it look like I couldn't handle it, like I was being too sensitive, which, in this family, was the same as being unstable. Back at my car, the air had cooled just enough to roll the windows down. I sat in the driver's seat, keys untouched in the ignition, staring at the silence in front of me. A part of me wanted to drive straight back to the motel, take a hot shower, and let the sting of the evening dissolve. But I hesitated. Something in my chest felt unfinished. Then my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was a generic alert. But when I glanced down, I saw it. A message from a group chat I didn't recognize. Legacy Core? I frowned. The only group threads I was part of were work-related or painfully dry family announcements. This one wasn't either. I tapped into the thread and scrolled. The first message was from Marvin. Did Elira actually show up wearing blue? Like, read the room? Then another from Deshaun. She thinks she's classy but walks around like she owns the place. Clydia chimed in. She always wanted to be the martyr. Just give her a check and she'll go away. And then the kicker. ATM girl strikes again. I kept scrolling. My stomach turned. There were screenshots of emails I'd sent when Dad was in hospice, texts I thought had been private, twisted out of context. One message, from a cousin I'd trusted since childhood, read, "She's not generous. She's guilty. That's the only reason she ever helps." It wasn't just mockery. It was a collection, a dossier, like they had been saving every piece of me to pick apart behind a digital curtain. I don't know who added me by mistake, or if it was intentional, a passive-aggressive jab dressed as an oops. But I screenshotted every word. Quietly, carefully, like someone documenting a crime scene no one else believed was real. I didn't text back. I didn't even leave the group. I just sat there, letting the glow of the screen dim against the dusk, letting the mask peel off without resistance. I drove to the motel in near silence. The usual classic rock station felt too loud, too out of place. When I got to the room, I threw my bag onto the bed, slipped off my shoes, and turned on the lamp beside the window. The light hit a box on the dresser, one I hadn't touched in years. It was an old keepsake box my Aunt Gail had given me when I graduated college. I'd left it at her place years ago after moving states, and she must have dropped it off here when she heard I'd be staying. I hadn't expected anything inside to matter anymore. But when I opened it, there it was. A gold necklace, thin chain, slightly tarnished from time. The charm used to read my name, Elira, etched in delicate script. Now the metal was scratched, almost buffed out entirely, but the curve of the E was still faintly visible. And I knew that necklace, because Marvine wore it at brunch. She had it tucked into her blouse, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, but I had seen it. The same charm, same clasp, same chain, only now with no name. I held it in my palm, turning it slowly. My chest didn't ache, it just settled, like a question had finally been answered. That necklace was mine. It had been mine since I was 15. Dad had it custom made when I won the county spelling bee. He said, "It's not about the trophy, it's about remembering who you are when no one's clapping." I guess someone decided I didn't need to remember anymore. After a while, I set the necklace down and pulled an old notebook from the bottom of the box. I hadn't opened it in years. It still had a coffee stain on the back cover and a folded receipt stuck between the pages from a diner in North Carolina. My first solo road trip. Inside, about halfway through, was a journal entry I barely remembered writing. It said, "If they only call you when something breaks, you're not a daughter, you're a service." I read it aloud to the quiet room, my voice flat, steady, not broken, not bitter, just clear. I'd known. Even then. I turned off the lamp and lay on top of the blanket, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The air conditioner clicked on, low and humming, the only sound in the room. Tomorrow, I'd see them again. Pretend I didn't know what I knew. Not yet. Not all at once. Because letting truth out too fast would let them pretend they didn't hear it. And I wasn't about to give them that. By morning, the room was still cool and quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't invite rest but dares you to act. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through old messages, staring at the familiar names that now read like strangers. My phone felt heavier than it should have, like it knew what I was about to do. I opened the group chat, the one labeled Family Thread, not the secret one they thought I didn't know about. This was the polished one, the version for announcements and potluck signups and fake birthday wishes. I typed a single line. No salutation, no context. "I've been holding your secret for 10 years. I'm done protecting people who erase me." Then I hit send. Nothing for 5 minutes. Just that little read receipt under each name. Marvine, Clydia, Deshawn, a few cousins. Every one of them saw it, and not one of them answered. Then from Branwyn, a heart emoji, no words. But it was enough. The kind of enough that confirms what you already knew, that someone else had been watching and just didn't have the nerve to say anything until now. I tossed the phone beside me on the bed and took a breath, the kind that doesn't calm you, just clears space. 26 minutes later, the screen lit up again. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then picked up. "Elira," she said, her voice too sweet, too smooth. "I saw your message." I waited. "Is everything all right, sweetheart? Maybe it's not the time to dig up old wounds. We're trying to have peace, aren't we?" Peace. That word always felt weaponized in her mouth. Translated, it meant, don't cause waves unless you're ready to be blamed for the flood. "I think we've confused peace with silence," I said flatly. She laughed lightly. You've always been dramatic, you know that? Sensitive? Your father used to say you felt things too much. He also used to say I was the only one who cleaned up after the messes. Silence. Then the classic move. Pivot and dismiss. Let's not become the bitter one in the family, okay? That's not a good look. Thanks for the advice, I said, and hung up. No goodbye, no love you. Just the click of a line that didn't need to stay open anymore. I got dressed slowly. A plain blouse, clean jeans, sneakers. I wasn't planning to go anywhere dramatic. Just to the diner around the corner to get some air, some pancakes, and maybe remember what it felt like to sit somewhere without being judged for breathing. At the booth, between bites, I opened my phone again. Not to check replies. Still nothing for the record. But to open a folder I hadn't touched in over a year. It was labeled just in case. Inside, scanned emails, receipts for loans that had never been repaid, medical bills with my name at the top, but someone else's story tied to them. Screenshots of messages that started with, L, I know this is a lot to ask, and ended with silence once I paid. At the bottom, one file stood out. LenaCharleston.pdf. I didn't open it, not yet. But I stared at it like it might blink first. That file, those pages, were the one thing I'd kept to myself. The one truth that, if exposed, would crack their polished little story wide open. It wasn't a bluff. It was the reason they'd always tread just slightly carefully, even as they pushed me further out. Marvine's perfect image, her Instagram-ready marriage, the whispered business trips that didn't match her calendar. That PDF held dates, hotel charges, and names. And I'd held it for a decade. Out of grace, out of restraint, out of some foolish loyalty that they'd long ago stopped earning. I slid the phone face down and looked out the diner window. Cars passed. A couple argued quietly near the parking lot. The waitress filled coffee cups like it was muscle memory. No one cared what I was carrying. No one had to. That was the point. When I paid the check and stepped outside, the sunlight was sharp but welcome. I walked down the block slowly, no destination in mind. I just needed motion. Back at the motel, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call anyone. I sat by the window and watched the afternoon pass like a train I didn't need to catch. I'd given them a warning. Not a threat. Not a plea. A line. And if they crossed it, they'd find out that the quiet one doesn't stay quiet forever. The next morning, I dressed slower than usual. Not out of indecision, but intention. I wanted to wear something plain, unremarkable, something no one could pick apart later. Gray sweater, dark jeans, a pair of flats I could walk in for hours, if it came to that. Brunch was being held under the big tent in the backyard, a safe fallback in case it rained. It didn't. The sky was obnoxiously clear. Rows of folding tables stretched out under plastic chandeliers, and someone had lit those fake candles again, trying hard to look like warmth without providing any. I arrived halfway through the coffee refill chatter. My seat had no nameplate, again. I didn't bother to ask. Just as I was settling in, Marvine stood up from the head of the table, beaming like she was about to announce a prize. Before we move on to dessert, she said, her voice just a bit too loud, let's hear from our little sister. Elira always has the best stories, don't you think? People clapped, some out of politeness, some because they genuinely didn't see the dagger wrapped in glitter. A few heads turned in my direction. I caught Clydia's expression, tight smile, eyes already scanning for how to control the damage if I stepped too far out of line. I stood, walked to the mic that had been pulled into the center aisle. I could feel the tension before I touched it. Static filled my ear when I spoke. I just wanted to share a small memory about Dad, I began, my voice steady. He once told me, the night before his last surgery, that he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being forgotten. The mic cut. Just like that. I tapped it once. Nothing. A few people chuckled nervously. A cousin behind me said, technical stuff, you know how it is. Marvine tilted her head. Someone check the battery? Clydia sipped her orange juice like it had nothing to do with her. I smiled, quiet, controlled, and walked back to my seat. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for another try. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a folder. Thick. Tabbed. Labeled. I placed it on the table in front of them, calm as laying down a menu. Marvine blinked. You've been collecting dirt? No, I said. I documented. There's a difference. She reached for it. I let her. Inside were copies of bank transfers from my accounts to theirs. Text messages asking for help. Screenshots of urgent, "Can you wire this just until next Friday?" Emails with subject lines like emergency and only you can help. Itemized invoices from hospitals, tuition payments, car repairs. Everything they'd asked for. Years of it, all labeled by date and who requested it. One page near the front was titled, "When they said it was an emergency." Marvine flipped through silently at first, then scoffed. "This is petty." "No," I said. "What's petty is pretending I was never part of this family while depending on me like I was your safety net." Deshawn leaned forward, squinting at one of the pages. "Wait, this was you? You paid for the van last year?" Granwyn's voice came from the end of the table. "I thought that donation came from the church." I looked around. It didn't. It came from me. But I didn't say anything because I thought keeping peace meant swallowing what hurt. The table went quiet. Clydia still hadn't looked at me directly. She tapped her nails against the edge of her plate like she wanted to make noise, but hadn't picked the right distraction yet. I took a breath. I'm not asking for thanks. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm not even asking to be included. I'm just done pretending that silence is the same thing as grace. I sat back down. No one moved. The tent, the candles, the whole stage they'd built to freeze me out. It all sat still, like someone had hit pause on the performance. Someone at the far end reached for a napkin. It tore. Marvine shifted in her chair. "You always find a way to make yourself the center, huh?" "No," I replied. "I just stopped letting you build your narrative around my silence." And with that, I stood, gathered my bag, and walked away. Not storming off, not slamming chairs, just walking. I passed by the buffet table, the silverware stacked neatly, and reached the edge of the tent. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She had receipts." Yes. Yes, I did. I didn't go back to the motel after that brunch. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the road hum beneath me. I didn't need a destination. I just needed space to hold my breath for a bit longer. When the sun started dipping low, I turned back toward the house, not because I missed it, but because Orville had texted. He said he was nearby and needed to speak with me in person. He didn't elaborate, just said, "Your father left something behind. It's time." That was enough to turn the wheel. The dinner portion of the reunion was being set up when I arrived. Long tables under the sycamores, white lights strung like wedding decor, plates already lined up. People smiled and waved when they saw me, too rehearsed to feel real. I nodded back, just enough to keep it moving. Orville was waiting by the far end of the patio, holding a brown envelope, his suit jacket wrinkled from hours in the car. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Maybe he hadn't. He didn't greet me with small talk, no pleasantries, just handed me the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. "Your father gave this to me before his last surgery," he said, his voice low. "He told me to hold it, said, 'Only give it to Alira if it comes to this.' I didn't ask what this meant. We both knew. I opened it with slow hands. Inside was a copy of my father's original will. Clean, legal, notarized, dated 6 months before his final hospitalization. In it, he'd named me executor of his estate. Not Marvane, not Clydia. Me. He wrote in clear language that I was to be the one overseeing decisions regarding the family home, the investments, and, specifically, the future preservation of family legacy. His words, not mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply folded the paper back, slid it into my bag, and thanked Orville with a firm nod. They changed it, didn't they? I asked. They filed a revision. But legally, he paused, that only holds if you were informed. Were you? I shook my head. No. Then you need to do something about it, he said. Because they already are. By the time we returned to the table, the food had just been served. Someone had carved the roast. The bread basket was already half empty. No one stood when we approached, except Marvine, who looked up and froze when she saw what was in my hand. Clydia's gaze followed, steady but cautious, like she knew the game had shifted. Orville pulled out the extra chair beside me and sat. No announcement, no invitation, just presence, which sometimes says more than words. I stood up, not rushed, not dramatic, just firm. I need to say something, I said. Some glanced up. Others kept chewing. But slowly, one by one, heads turned. My father gave me something, I said, holding up the folder. A copy of the original will, the one you all never showed me. Marvine laughed once, sharp, strained. That's old. It was changed later. We agreed. Orville cut in, cool and precise. Revisions are only valid if all legal beneficiaries were informed. Were they? He looked directly at Clydia. She didn't blink. We did what made sense. Elira has always been self-sufficient. She didn't need— That's not how the law works, Orville said. A hush followed. Someone's fork hit the plate with a clink. Branwen asked, almost under her breath. So, the house, it's hers? I didn't look at Marvane. I looked at the space between us. I didn't ask for this, but I won't let you rewrite history and steal what was meant for me. Marvine opened her mouth, then shut it. The flush in her cheeks was louder than any reply she could have given. Clydia turned to me, voice soft but cold. So what? You're going to sue your family now? No, I said. I'm going to enforce what my father wanted. And if anyone continues to misrepresent it, I'll let the courts handle it. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. Silence is only powerful when the other side expects you to stay quiet. Deshawn stood up without a word and walked away. The clatter of his chair broke the silence. No one followed him. For the first time in years, Marvine didn't have a comeback. Her face was still, her fingers tight around her napkin. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Clydia sat back in her chair, staring at the half-eaten piece of cornbread like it might tell her what to do next. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't owe them that. I looked at Orville, nodded once, and sat down. I'd given them the chance to do this the quiet way. They chose the opposite. The next morning, I found the envelope tucked beneath my motel door. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. Just my name typed in block letters on a plain manila flap. Inside was a small USB drive and a note printed on the back of a gas station receipt. It read, "You deserve to know what really happened." No signature, but I didn't need one. I didn't plug it in right away. I stared at it for a while, holding it between my fingers like it might melt. Then I crossed the room, pulled my laptop out of the drawer, and clicked it awake. The folder on the drive was titled, After the Funeral, Strategy Call. I knew that title. I knew the cadence of that phrasing. I'd heard Clydia say it before, usually when discussing money or legacy, or whenever she felt like the family's image needed managing. The recording started mid-conversation. At first, it was hard to tell who was speaking over the phone, but then I heard Marvine's voice, clear as glass. She sounded calm, confident. "We can't let her control anything," she said. "If Elira gets a copy of the will, it's over." Clydia replied, "She won't. She never asks. She just gives." Then silence. Then laughter, low and knowing. Marvine again. "That's what makes it easy. She wants to be needed. She won't push back." There it was. My whole relationship with them boiled down to a single truth. They mistook my love for submission. I listened all the way through, twice. The second time, I turned on captions, so I could see their words in black and white, just in case anyone ever doubted me again. By the time the audio ended, my hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry, I was done. Not even an hour passed before my phone lit up with a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. They called again. The third time, I picked up. Elira! Clydia's voice was soft. Too soft. Yes. I just heard from Deshawn. I understand you're upset. Is that what you understand? A pause. Then she shifted tones. If you go through with this, if you make this public, I don't know if my heart can handle it. There it was. The guilt grenade. You've always been a passionate one, she added, but don't let your emotions ruin what little peace we still have. You're better than that, sweetheart. I didn't say anything. I mean, what's done is done, right? She continued, almost pleading. Let's not punish everyone for choices that made sense at the time. I ended the call. No dramatic line, no emotional rebuttal, just silence. Because sometimes the most deafening answer is no response at all. I closed the laptop, took a walk down to the parking lot, let the air settle. There were kids playing soccer across the street, the thump of the ball steady and careless. I stood there for 5 minutes, absorbing what normal looked like. Then I went back to my room, reopened my laptop, and began writing. Not a threat, not a smear, just facts. I started the document like this. My name is Elira Adams. I am the daughter of Henrik Adams. I was the named executor of his original will. I have since been excluded, manipulated, and lied to by those who were supposed to protect that legacy. This is what I know. I didn't list names, not yet. I didn't speculate, I documented. Each entry had a timestamp, a scanned copy, or a recording file ID. I made it clean, professional, not emotional, but unmistakably human. And at the end of the statement, before I signed my name, I added one final line. I was not removed from the family. I left it when it stopped being one. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the motel ceiling again. Same old pattern of peeling paint and water stains. But this time, I wasn't waiting for them to make a move. They already had. And I was done being their cleanup crew. If truth was a bomb, I was done holding the pin for someone else's comfort. The morning after I sent the document, I took my coffee to go and walked the edge of the estate property. Not because I needed fresh air, but because I wanted to see it all one last time. With clear eyes, not the kind that hoped to belong. Tables were already being cleared, decorations tossed into trash bags. The reunion was wrapping up, but the performance wasn't quite over. People milled around the front porch, pretending to chat about weather, sports, the drive home, anything but the earthquake I'd set off. By mid-morning, word had spread. Eyes followed me, but lips stayed shut. I wasn't there to gloat. I wasn't there to be forgiven. I was there to finish it. They'd planned one last thank you brunch for the out-of-town relatives. Marvine, of course, had placed herself in charge. She stood near the mimosa bar, all smiles and clenched teeth, acting like nothing had happened. Clydia avoided eye contact altogether, busying herself with napkins that didn't need straightening. I was about to leave when Branwen stepped onto the patio with something in her hand, an iPad and a folded piece of paper. Her cheeks were flushed, but her spine was straight. She didn't glance at me as she walked toward the middle of the group, just cleared her throat and started reading. I have something I need to say, she began, voice shaking only on the first word. This is an email I received from Marvine 6 months ago, after I wished Elira a happy birthday. That got their attention. She opened the message and read it aloud. You can be friendly with her if you want, but just know you're picking a side. If you continue contact, don't expect to be included in anything going forward. Branwen paused. I didn't reply. I didn't want to choose. But watching what happened these last few days, I realized silence was choosing too. She turned to face me. I should have spoken sooner, but I see it now, what you've carried, and I'm sorry. No one clapped, no one moved. Even Marvin didn't interrupt. Her jaw flexed, but she stayed still, calculating, watching her narrative crumble from someone else's voice. I met Branwen's eyes, gave a small nod. Then I walked into the house. Not because I was upset, but because I had one last place to check before I left for good. The guest house in the back, where I used to stay during summer breaks, hadn't changed much. Same dusty curtains, same creaky floors. In the desk drawer by the window, buried beneath old postcards and dried-out pens, was an envelope with no name on it. Inside were 6 documents: hospital forms, invoices, donation acknowledgments, all in my handwriting. My name signed at the bottom. But each of them had been scanned, edited, and submitted under Marvine's. It wasn't just financial manipulation. It was identity theft, dressed in sisterhood. I sat down on the bed, placed the documents in a new folder, and slid it into my bag. When I stepped back outside, I didn't walk toward the others. I stood by the old oak tree and texted a short message to the group chat. Meet me at the driveway, 5 minutes. To their credit, they came. Marvine, Clydia, even Deshawn, though he stayed toward the back. I didn't ask for their attention. I didn't give them a speech. Instead, I handed each of them a plain white envelope. Inside, legal revocation forms, financial disassociations, cease and desist letters drafted by Orville. No emotion, just paperwork. I'm severing every tie, I said, calm and direct. No more accounts, no more emergency wires, no more fallback roles. If you need someone else to clean up your messes, I suggest you start now. Marvine stared at hers like it might bite. This is extreme. What you did was extreme, I replied. This is closure. Clydia looked at me like she wanted to speak, but no words came. And that was fine. I didn't need them anymore. I turned and walked to my car. Not a dramatic exit, not a door slam or tires screeching. Just the quiet closing of a chapter I'd rewritten on my own terms. As I drove away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. They were still standing there, papers in hand, mouths shut, storyless. I didn't burn bridges. I just walked away with the matches they handed me years ago. After I drove past the estate, I didn't take the highway. I took the long way back through town, winding past the school where I used to volunteer, the park where Dad and I once sat in silence, feeding geese like it was our own sacred ritual. I didn't plan it, but my hands turned the wheel on their own. Maybe my body knew where I needed to go before I did. The sun was soft overhead, dipping behind wisps of cloud, and the breeze smelled like cut grass and old memories. I parked by the curb, got out, and walked slowly toward the lake at the far end of the park. The same bench was still there, crooked on one side. The same water, still as glass, reflecting a version of the world that looked gentler than it was. I sat for a while, just listening. No music, no cars, just the water and birds, and that strange comfort that comes from stillness that no one expects you to perform inside. There was one thing left to do. After checking out of the guest house that morning, I'd gone up to the attic, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. I knew there were still things left behind, things that used to matter. I'd almost missed it. Tucked beneath a pile of folded quilts inside a cedar chest was a small envelope, yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in Dad's blocky handwriting, the kind he only used when he wanted his words to last. No one had ever mentioned it. No one had delivered it. I opened it slowly, hands steady, breath low. Inside was a letter, dated 2 months before his last surgery. Elira, I know they'll never see you for what you are, but I did. I know what you gave, what you held back, what you swallowed so they wouldn't have to taste bitterness. I couldn't change them, but I could leave you something that said, I saw you. You were never invisible to me. That was it. No legal advice, no instructions, just words I had waited my whole life to hear, only to realize now I didn't need them to be okay. But they helped anyway. I folded the letter back into its envelope, slipped it into my coat pocket, and sat still. The lake rippled once. A goose honked in the distance. The breeze tugged gently at my sleeve. When I got back to the motel that afternoon, I saw the messages, all lined up in the group thread like beads on a string someone had dropped and never picked up. Neva's been crying. It feels weird without you here. You've made your point. Can we just move on? I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled up my emergency contact form, the one I'd filled out years ago when they insisted on being listed for insurance, for legal fallback, for the illusion of safety. I opened the form, deleted every name, and typed in my own. Emergency contact, Elira Adams. That felt more honest than anything I'd ever signed. Later that week, I printed out a copy of the family group chat, the thread where they'd shared birthdays, requests for help, fake encouragement, and empty praise. I folded the pages into a paper boat, neat and deliberate, then drove back to the lake. Same bench, same quiet. I walked to the water's edge, crouched low, and placed the boat on the surface. The wind caught it slowly, then fully. I watched it drift, no resistance, no collapse. You don't owe them your silence anymore, I whispered. It wasn't a declaration, it was a release. I sat back on the bench until the boat vanished from view. Not sunk, just gone. That evening, back home, I didn't unpack immediately. I left the suitcase by the door, made a cup of tea, and watched the light shift across the walls. I was tired, but not drained. Alone, but not abandoned. Empty, but in a way that finally made room for something else. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but peace. And that was enough. I didn't win. I just stopped losing myself. And maybe that's the only kind of victory that lasts. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean you've given up. It means you've finally stopped waiting for someone to treat you the way you've always deserved. For years, I believed keeping the peace meant staying silent. That being the strong one meant fixing everything, even when it broke me. But here's what I know now. Love without respect is a trap, not a bond. And being part of a family should never cost you your dignity. I didn't leave to hurt them. I left to save what was left of me. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one who kept things together while everyone else took you for granted, you're not alone. And you don't owe anyone your silence just so they can stay comfortable. We talk a lot in this country about loyalty, about forgiveness, about blood being thicker than water. But maybe the real test of love isn't how much you can endure. Maybe it's how bravely you can draw the line when enough is enough. So let me ask you, have you ever walked away from people you once called family? Do you believe forgiveness requires reconciliation? Or can it exist without going back? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video didn't sit right with you, that's okay too. Share your perspective. Let's have a real conversation. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, honest, human, sometimes messy, but always rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You never know. The next one might just be yours. Thanks for watching. And remember, healing doesn't always look like hugging it out. Sometimes it looks like closing the door and finally locking it.